Do you know this aircraft? It's the British Boulton Paul Defiant. It's often featured as one of the worst planes of World War II. No, seriously, it even has a prime placement in a book literally entitled The World's Worst Aircraft. Now, I'm not going to be a contrarian and simply tell you that the Defiant is a terrific aircraft, a scourge of the sky, and the best thing after sauerkraut. But this video leaps to the defense of the Defiant by placing it in its proper context, explain how it got its reputation, and shed some light on its actual overlooked achievements. And in the end, it is up to you to decide on how to judge this aircraft. To fully understand the Defiant, we need to understand why it was developed in the first place. Although a newcomer to the RAF, coming off the production lines on the eve of World War II, the basic idea that preceded the development can be traced back into World War I. The RAF wanted a modern, turreted single-engine fighter with competitive performance, a dedicated bomber-destroyer able to also operate at night. The need for such a plane was in part due to the RAF's own conviction that the bomber will always get through, meaning that a dedicated bomber hunter was required as a deterrent to enemy bombers. For more information on the history of RAF bomber doctrine, check out the advertised video. Meant to have comparable performance to the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire, the Defiant nonetheless had the worst performance out of the bunch. Not a surprise, given the stark conceptual difference between these aircraft. Let's quickly turn to the turret, the Defiant's most prominent feature. The 4-gun electro-hydraulic turret was sophisticated and of French origin. Boulton Paul had obtained a production license at a bargain price in 1934, redesignated it as the Type A MK.I, armed with 4 303 Browning machine guns, 600 rounds per gun. Beyond this, there was no armament. Before the RAF unleashed the Defiant on the Germans, mock combat against fighters showed that unless the Defiant was expertly flown, it was nothing but another mark on someone's kill list. Unsurprisingly perhaps for a plane designed for anti-bomber duties. One important feature of the post-trial report stated that every degree by which the field of fire can be extended towards the flight direction is of great value, hinting at the perhaps less than ideal reality that the pilot had no guns he could operate himself. There was in fact a modification made so that the turret could be locked in a forward firing position with the pilot as the operator. However, with no synchronization, this would shred the plane's propeller as much as it would shred the enemy. Not good. There was some consolation, however. When flown against the Blenheim, trial combat showed that it was indeed well able to take on a bomber. After all, that's what the Defiant had been designed for. In light of this, RAF pilots proposed, tested and approved their own tactics. The first tactic was to overtake the enemy bomber on a parallel course, riddling him with bullets all the way. The second was to converge during a beam attack. The third was to dive from above and cross the bow of the enemy. In each attack, the Defiants would coordinate their strike and level their guns at the same enemy. These attacks could be done from both sides at the same time or from only one side. For defensive purposes, a defensive circle was considered to be the best option, allowing Defiants to give mutual support in case of an enemy fighter attack. So before we continue, let's wrap this up very quickly. The RAF wanted a turreted bomber-destroyer, which it got. Performance was mediocre but adequate. The crews also had a clear idea on how to attack enemy bombers and how to defend themselves against enemy fighters. So, what went wrong? Well, what sounds good on paper is not always good in practice. It quickly crystallized that the reality of air warfare in World War II was different than expected. Here, we have to analyze the early combat in some detail. Used operationally from mid-May 1940 and during the evacuation of Dunkirk, the Defiant pilots seemingly went through highs and lows with each day. In May 1940, Defiant crews claimed to have shot down 65 German planes. On one specific day, the 29th of May, 37 Germans were claimed. Yet these claims were, as the name suggests, claims, made by crews embroiled in swirling dogfights, leveling their guns at the same targets. We now know that on the same day, only 14 German planes were lost in total. This was not known to the RAF, nor the Defiant crews that made these claims in good faith. Indeed, this apparent success of the Defiant at Dunkirk initially seemed to suggest the validity of the turreted bomber-destroyer. Defiant certainly damaged many German aircraft, forcing them to ditch bombs, smoke, or dive away. Yet these planes often recovered and returned home. There is also no evidence that proves that German pilots mistook the Defiant for Hurricanes, a statement often made after a British officer who had not been involved in the fighting had suggested this possibility. In fact, the Luftwaffe was aware of the Defiant since the previous year. As Alec Brew notes, the Defiant had appeared at the Royal Aeronautical Society's garden party on the 14th of May 1939, and photographs of the aircraft, together with technical descriptions, appeared in German aeronautical magazines. The Luftwaffe already knew about the Defiant and what to expect. Furthermore, when German 109s ran into the Defiant on May 13, 1940, shooting down 5 out of 6, 2 were examined after crashing in France. Never mind their actual success, the Defiant pilots fought well with what they had and were rather fond of their aircraft. Their fight continued with the Battle of Britain. In 4 engagements, the crews claimed 19 German bombers versus 11 Defiants lost. Based on these losses, it began to dawn on the RAF that Defiant was out of its depth. The losses might sound low overall, but they were not considered sustainable. This could have indeed been the end of the Defiant, and for many it is. Popular memory stops here, ridiculing the plane as a flawed, outdated concept that had no place in World War II. Indeed, the original concept of an unopposed single-engine turreted bomber-destroyer had failed completely. The RAF was in somewhat of a predicament. It had ordered a substantial amount of Defiants, even invested in upgrades. All in all, over 1,000 would be produced. Production had picked up and new squadrons could be formed. But what could be done with all these planes when operationally they didn't deliver? Pragmatism was the order of the day. If the Defiant couldn't succeed at day, why not try it at night? After all, at this point the RAF had few planes to oppose German night bombing. Planes such as the Beaufighter had yet to arrive in substantial numbers. The crews had to learn a whole new way of combat. Initial success was minimal, accidents frequent, and frustration mounted. With a near complete stop of German night intrusions, there wasn't much to shoot at anyway. During this time, a new tactic was developed. Spotting an enemy from above, the pilot dove below the enemy, set himself up slightly behind the intruder, closed the distance, and ordered the gunner to let fly. This allowed the Defiant a good, clean shot at the engine and wings, usually with total surprise. 7 night fighter squadrons with Defiants now stood ready as German activity picked up. While they had some credible success, especially during times of high German activity, the Defiant was no match to the Beaufighter. Soon Defiant squadrons began retraining to this aircraft. Even the installation of airborne interception radar on Defiants did not reverse their fortune. By mid-1942, the last squadron had traded in their Defiants. Let us look at the final victory talent of the Defiant based on a publication by Alec Brew. The claimed victories amount to 152, losses to 37. Losses only include aircraft shot down by Germans, and it does not include operational losses based on other factors. The claimed victories are harder to guarantee as true victories, especially considering the factors we alluded to earlier. As such, take these figures with a grain of salt, as the author himself mentions. Trying to keep score in aerial combat is a minefield of contentions. The following figures are therefore open to all kinds of interpretation. I do not claim that they are anything but a guide to the performance of the Defiant squadrons in aerial combat, my personal estimate of their achievement. And so ends the story of the Defiant, child of an arguably flawed concept that nonetheless soldiered on through adversity. But hold on, the Defiant actually had one last salute. It was now used as a testing ground for new turret designs, ejection seats, as a target tug, and occasionally as trainers, especially for aerial defensive gunnery. It also saw service in early electronic warfare by combating German radar in 1942 and 43, and as an air-sea rescue aircraft. These are all practical and significant ends to one of history's more bizarre aircraft designs. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon and please share this video. If you would like to know something about German night fighting, click here. And if you want to check out my video on clearing up Spitfire misconceptions, click here. As always, have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.